Welcome everybody to the latest summer webcast in this series organised by the Red Line Group. My thanks to Christopher Brown for setting up tonight's glorious speaker I'm about to introduce, and also to Gary Bronzier, who's going to be pressing all the right buttons, and to you all for joining us. This session is being recorded, but one of the great benefits of joining in person, as you know, is that you get the opportunity to ask lots of questions. And my goodness me, the topic tonight is diet and diet issues for people with pouches. And in all the correspondence and in all the forums that I've seen over the years, probably the most frequent topic is dietary issues for pouches. So it's one that always generates a lot of interest and always generates a lot of question and answers. So we've asked Gabriella to limit her talk tonight to about half an hour, 35 minutes, because I'm sure there'll be a few questions to answer afterwards. So Gabriella Pufu, absolutely delighted to have you join us again tonight, giving up your Wednesday evening. Gabriella is the support of the Line Group. This is, I think, the fourth year in a row that you've addressed our membership, and I'm absolutely delighted at your support, because it's greatly appreciated. You bring a wealth of knowledge and experience of dietary care for patients all around London, various appointments over the last 12 years at prestigious centres such as St Bart's and King's College Hospital, tremendous research centres. And you've been at St Mark's, according to your LinkedIn profile, for about 4 years now. So obviously right at the hub of inflammatory bowel disease care and pouch care. So your experience is both impressive and extremely relevant for tonight. You currently hold the title, according to LinkedIn, of Advanced Specialist Inflammatory Bowel Disease Dietitian. It's quite a mouthful, but you know, when we talk about St Mark's and there's very particular care that St Mark's offers to pouches, one of the great features of that is the multidisciplinary approach. And the dietitian has an essential role, along with the pharmacy, along with the physiotherapists and all the support staff, along with the surgeons, of course, themselves, in terms of providing that holistic care for pouches. So tonight we're going to focus on dietary care, and absolutely delighted to introduce Gabriella Pufu.
Hello everyone, can you all hear me?
Yep. Yes, we can, very clearly.
That's great. So hello from me. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very delighted to be here with you guys. I know that I have an accent and it might be a little bit difficult to understand me sometimes. So please write all your questions down, and I'm more than happy to repeat everything if I need to, or if you guys want to explain anything in more detail. So initially, I created the presentation for about 45 minutes. I was trying to cut everything down, but we might need to rush through a few slides. It's a little bit different this year in comparison to the previous years. So what I try to include is all the buzzwords that are coming up in health and in diet in general, including prebiotics and probiotics, and a lot of the things that are currently in the media. So we'll try and give you the evidence for that. I'm going to try and share my screen. So are you able to see it?
Very good, yes.
Yeah. So let's play from the start. Great. So this is a presentation for a general diet in ileoanal pouch for patients, and in more, sorry, can you, there's something popping up. I'm not sure if I need to close it. Can you guys see it?
That's okay, it's fine.
Okay, great. So it's a general kind of overview, because there's so many things about diet and pouches that we could talk about. So this is just a summary. So what are the objectives today? We're going to talk a little bit about the nutrient absorption and digestion in relation to the anatomy of the ileoanal pouch, how the pouch is formed, and what the effects of that change in anatomy, in digestion and absorption of nutrients, how to reintroduce food after surgery, how to choose a healthy diet, and what diet can affect in the pouch function. I've included both the new pouch patients and the established, which means that they have you guys have the pouch for more than a year, and we're going to talk about the differences. So this is my favorite picture of all times. I think I show it every single time, proving that it's my favorite. The reason is it shows the anatomy of a normal digestion and absorption, including the stomach, the food pipe, the first bit of the small bowel, and a little bit about the large bowel, which we know in pouch it has been removed. So the reason I like it so much is because we can see how important each and every bit of the small bowel is. The small bowel is the main site for nutrient absorption and digestion, and each and every part of it is responsible for a different nutrient or vitamin or a macronutrient. So we've got the first bit of the small bowel, the duodenum, which is responsible for the digestion of monosaccharides, amino acids, which are the small building blocks for protein. And we follow it down to the jejunum, the middle part of the small bowel, where we can see that on the brush border of the intestine. So just on the surface of the intestine, there are enzymes that break down the carbohydrates into smaller pieces, monosaccharides, and we absorb them. But it also includes a site for iron, and we know iron is really important for us in giving us energy. We follow down to the jejunum and we see that the areas, there are different doors almost, that the calcium gets absorbed, the folate gets absorbed, the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K. And we move through down to the bowel, and we see that towards the end of the bowel, we see the B12, another important vitamin for energy, is being absorbed. And that's a very, very special area for all pouch patients, because this is exactly the area, the ileum, that the pouch is created. So we know that the pouch is created either from 2, is the J pouch, from 3, which is the S pouch, or from 4, which is the W pouch, limbs of the small intestine. We know that the most common pouch is the J pouch, and it's quite common for our surgeons to do it here. It's reliable, it has a good function, and it's from what the literature say, is in creating that J pouch. So the importance of showing the large bowel to you is to show what we should be focusing on when we remove a very important part of the bowel. The large bowel doesn't necessarily do anything in terms of digestion and absorption of food. It mostly focuses on fluid and salt. So it's the main site that the bowel reabsorbs from what we drink and eat, from the salts, all the extra fluid, and rehydrates the body. So when we remove that bit and we create the pouch, we need to focus on how do we keep hydrated, both in giving our patients the right amount of fluid, but also in giving our patients the right amount of salts. Another important element of the digestion is the bile salt. I'm not sure how bile salt digestion. I'm not sure how many of you in your medical teams have come across the term bile salt malabsorption or bile acid malabsorption. So it's not necessarily a malabsorption in nutrients, but it's a malabsorption in these bile salts, which are created by the liver. They are produced by the liver and sent into our bowel to digest fats and break them down into smaller parts, free acids and free fatty acids and monoglycerides. And as soon as the free fatty acids and the monoglycerides, the smaller parts of the fat, get digested and absorbed by the small bowel, these bile salts, having done all their hard work, they need to travel through to the ileum where our pouch is created and get back into the body to go back into the circulation. When we have inflammation or when we remove quite a bit of the ileum, these bile salts can't really get back into the body. They stay into the pouch and they create something called bile salt diarrhea. One of the areas that we work with patients here is to identify what causes the diarrhea in pouch patients. If it's the bile salts, if it's they're having inflammation, pouchitis, or if it's something to do with their diets, and try and counteract that. For bile salts, we give something called bile-questrans, which binds these bile salts so they no longer cause a problem into the pouch. Moving on to a different kind of image of where we get all of the carbohydrates, proteins, and fat absorbed in a kind of a simpler format. So, pouch formation. We know that we are losing the large bowel. We know that it's a responsible site for reabsorbing water and salts to rehydrate our bodies. So the result is that normally in a normal pouch function, we have more frequent bowel movements than we would if we had the large bowel without inflammation, of course. So we have a higher frequency, but we also have more liquid stool, so more kind of a paste porridge type of consistency ideally, but we also have more of it. We know that the pouch is formed from the last 32 centimeter of the terminal ileum, and we know that that's the side of the B12 as we mentioned before. So knowing that that is the side, we know that a lot of our patients need to be having regular B12 injections to counteract for that deficiency that we usually see. These are new guidelines that we haven't had before in pouch. So ECHO is the European Crohn's and Colitis Organization. They came up with their guidelines on IBD in general, and they had a small bit about pouch. And they mentioned that unfortunately, there are no specific diets that our pouch patients should follow. The reason is that we know in literature, after surgery, a lot of our patients can have different intolerances to food, and different patients have different intolerances. So it's a huge variability, and we don't really want to avoid and restrict food groups that patients do not necessarily need to restrict. So it's very hard to just for one form of diet and give it to all patients. So there are no specific ones, but we do know that the fluid and the salts are really important, and we need to give advice on those. And we also know that deficiencies like anemia from either iron or B12 are really common. So we should be monitoring through either our GPs or in the patients that we see here. And we know that having a pouch is an independent, so in itself a risk for osteopenia, which is thinning of the bones. So what are the implications of forming a pouch? We're repeating things, and it's the fluid, the electrolytes, the bile salts. There is also a risk of other trace element abnormalities. More recently, there was a study on vitamin K, which they're currently trying to do more studies for and see if it's a risk for pouch patients. And we also know that in the very first 6 to 8 weeks of surgery, we have the biggest changes in the pouch, the anatomy. The bowel hasn't gotten used of its new length, and we have the larger losses of both the fluid and the salt of about up to 2 liters a day. So 2 liters, 2 kilos. We know that as the time goes by, the pouch adapts, and in about a year after having a pouch, we almost go back to our normal average bowel frequency, which is around 5 to 6 bowel movements during the day, and between 1 to 2 bowel movements at night. I think it's really important for patients to know what they should be expecting as they are new normal, because a lot of the times I see patients that are around in that bracket and they're really worried because they're comparing themselves with their partners, with their friends, with people on the internet. And what we need to remember is that although it's not a stoma, an ileostomy, and we know that there are often 2-stage procedures that are happening to create a pouch, but it's not a stoma, but the anatomy is no different. It's literally taking that anatomy of the ileostomy and bringing it back into the body. I think of it as a hidden stoma. So it's really important to know what we are aiming for. So 5 to 6 times a day of bowel movements and 1 to 2 at night. So the bowel adapts. Why does that happen? The body is an amazing machine. It's a miracle that we see every single day. The kidneys, as the time goes by and up to 6 months to a year, our kidneys adapt. They become much more efficient. They reserve much more water and they reabsorb salts much better. Our small bowel adapts, and it goes through an adaptation period that it becomes more efficient with the same length that it has to absorb more and more nutrients. We know that what I would be aiming for with my patients is about a mushy consistency or a porridge consistency of the stools. And we know that our patients throughout the years, they might have the risk of having pouchitis, which is inflammation of the pouch. And we see that about 50 to 60% of our patients in the 10-year mark. So a lot of our patients have really good quality of life. And I see a lot of our patients that are really well nourished, but need almost fine-tuning in their diet and fluid to get the most of their diet, but also enjoy it, which is really, really important. So what are my goals when I see the patients? So I need to do a screening tool called MASK to identify the patients that are coming to me that are already malnourished, that are struggling with either losing weight or are not absorbing as well. So I'm an IBD dietitian, so I tend to see UC patients that are going on to have pouches, not familial adenopolyposis patients. And what I tend to see is patients that are really unwell, usually before surgery. Their colitis is usually really inflamed, their bowel is really inflamed, their colitis is out of control. Often the first part of the surgery happens as an emergency, although ideally we would all, as a team, we would like to plan elective admission for our patients to get them as nourished and optimized as possible. I very, very often see malnourished patients. I see patients that have been scared of food for a long time. They don't really like food. Even the thought of food, I had a patient today, he told me even the thought of it makes me feel sick. It's this repeated cycle of whatever I eat and whatever I put into my bowel. If my bowel is already inflamed, it goes through it and it makes me go to the loo more. So it's causing me a cycle of either accidents with seepage or running to the loo, not being able to go out. but also throughout the years, patients try to find out what are the food culprits that are causing irritation in their bowel. And what I find is that very rarely patients go back and re-challenge foods. They keep removing and restricting their diets without ever thinking that what happened at the time that I was struggling, my anatomy was either different or at the time I had a flare. So things change with time, and it's always important to focus in re-challenging food, trying foods again, and in very small amounts so that we don't almost shock our body if we've avoided it for a long time. But it's really important to, as much as possible, avoid unnecessary restrictions. The other thing that I find that it's very rarely mentioned is that food is much more than nutrition. It's much more than just putting energy into our body. I wish it was that simple in just using food for energy, but it's an amazing element of our culture, of our social life, eating and drinking with our friends and family. It reminds us of a lot of the things that we've learned from our parents and our grandparents. It reminds us of our culture and identity. And if you think about it, the very first act of love when we are born is breastfeeding through our mom. So we immediately connect food with love, food with nurture, and it's an emotional connection. That's why it's really important to see food holistically and try and make the diet of our patients as much as possible varied, balanced, and not causing all these negative thoughts. So I support patients before, try as much as possible, although it's really busy. Usually I see the malnourished patients, and the pouch nurses tend to see the patients that are not struggling with their nutrition as much. So we're focusing on preventing them to lose more weight, nourishing them as much as possible, and then going through the surgery, restricting the foods that will irritate a new pouch, but making sure that we reintroduce these foods later on. High energy, high protein diets to optimize the healing process and get the body back into recovery, but most importantly, hydration through fluid advice and salt. So the new patient, as soon as we have the surgery, my aim is to get patients as quickly as possible back to eating. We know that if we give food to the bowel, and if we nourish our patients quickly, they recover quicker, they get out of the hospital quicker, and they have a more kind of seamless recovery in their healing process of their wounds. We tell them to avoid high fiber foods initially. The reason is when you're having new surgery, that you've made sutures, you've almost rejoined, not almost, you've rejoined parts of the bowel to the bottom. We know that the area there is quite fragile, and we don't want anything that as it goes through it irritates, and it might cause our patients either to have pain or to have more bowel movements. We know that in the very first stages of the surgery, it's not so much the very first few days and the couple of weeks, it's not so much the high output that I would be worried about, but it's also blockage. So reducing that the skins, the pips, the seeds, the very harsh, crunchy foods, the whole grains, and large amounts of vegetables and fruits is really important. I'm sure if you guys have been in hospital, you know that our menu at St. Mark's is generally low fiber because of the types of patients that we have coming in. But if you are coming from anywhere else, it's worth checking with the hospital before you go if there are different menus that you could use, and kind of prepare for the surgery and the post-op periods. We know that the surgery, the first stage is usually for 6 to 8 weeks that we need to follow the diet. We know that if it's an ileostomy, we follow for about the low fiber diet for about 2 months. And if it's after a pouch, it varies between patients, but minimum 2 weeks and maximum 6 weeks. So it's really important not only to think of what we're eating, but how we eat it in terms of the food behavior. We chew our food well, we eat slowly, we avoid unnecessary interactions, we eat mindfully to enjoy our food the best as much as possible, but we also try with very small amounts and we build up as we feel that our tummy can take it. Many of our patients end up being on supplements as built up shakes. You might have heard of them as AIMS or as Complan, Ensure, Fortisip. We give those as a top up to the food and not instead of food. They're supplements in our diet, and we strive for a really high calorific diet with lots of protein for that wound healing and recovery. So hydration after the surgery. In the very first few weeks, as we mentioned, we can have up to 2 liters, 2 kilos fluid loss a day through our pouches. And it's the time that it's really early days and the bowel hasn't gotten used of its new length. So it's really important that we aim for at least 2 liters of fluid with our patients. Any fluid counts, but preferably non-caffeinated, so avoiding coffee and tea, but they do count as well. And importantly is to add extra salt to our meals, and that means 1/2 to 1 teaspoon extra per day. I know it sounds a lot. I know that the World Health Organization, rightly so, says don't eat much salt, but that doesn't apply to our patients that don't have their large bowel, which is reabsorbing all those salts. So if your output continues to be high, we need to modify the diet, do the low fiber, add more salt to the diet, but we also need to restrict to restrict how much of these diluted drinks we might be drinking and reintroduce something called the electrolyte mixture, which I'm sure you all know. I've seen your posts on Twitter. We know that electrolyte mixture has the right concentration, which is 90 millimoles, and it's really special for the small bowel to absorb, which needs a much different concentration of our fluids to the large bowel. And we know that we are also needing to slow down the bowel, and we often use things like loperamide or Imodium, omeprazole, which reduces the acid from our kind of the body produces and can impact on our pouch output, but also things like codeine for some patients. There are some surgeons, including myself in our team, that tend to ask for psyllium fiber. So psyllium is non-fermentable, so it doesn't get digested in our bowel or broken down by bacteria in our bowel. It's a type of fiber that, because it's not fermented and digestible, it traps water from the stools and it bogs it up. But there is also a lot of evidence showing that it reduces the time that the food goes through the bowel, so it reduces our gas our motility in the bowel and transit time. So checking for hydration, how can we check that at home? There is this great chart that shows the color of our urine, and I think of it often as kind of a straw color, a whiskey color. Are you feeling dehydrated? Do you have headaches? Do you have any cramps, which might be signs of losing this salt of potassium and magnesium from our pouch? Do you feel really tired and lethargic? Are you able to concentrate? And some of my patients say, I'm really craving for salty foods. So check your wee and see if you have all those kind of symptoms, you are most likely dehydrated. And what do we do about that? we try and bring the salt back to the body. This is the electrolyte mix recipe. I have a link in the slide as well, but generally we use glucose, baking soda and salt. We dissolve it in 1 liter of water. It needs to be really, really specific in terms of the amounts that we're using. The reason is that the concentration. If we change any of the salt or the baking soda or the glucose, the concentration will change and the small bowel will no longer absorb it. So we want to hydrate ourselves. I know that for many of you guys, including myself, if I'm honest, the taste is not great, but we do know that the taste buds change. If we continue taking it, your taste buds will adjust to it. But also there are a few tricks. Take it really, really cold. I usually make it up keep it in the fridge 24 hours and make it fresh every day. But I usually push some into the ice cube trays and then use those to blend and make a slushy, and it's so much better. Another thing we can do is add lime or lemon and fresh mint and make it almost like a mojito in a weird version. We also can add no added sugar, double strength squash. The citrus flavors work a little bit better because it's salty and it kind of works a little bit better than sweet. But the most important thing, and it's a question I have from many of my patients, can I use less sugar, or I have diabetes, can I not use the sugar? Unfortunately, no. The reason is in our bowel, in order for the border of our bowel, the top bit of our bowel to get this fluid mixture from the inside of our bowel into our body, it has a very special revolving door. That revolving door uses both the salt but also the sugar to revolve and put the same concentration, this concentration from the bowel into our body. If the concentration changes and the glucose is not there, the sugar is not there, the door will not revolve and we're not going to get it into our bowel. So don't worry about the sugar. It has a very specific reason. And if you are dehydrated, most likely your diabetes or what other worries you may have are also not going to be helped. So we need to target and treat the hydration. So this is the change in this year's kind of presentation, and I'm going to try and skim through it. If you can, try in a minute to just see how many of these yes ticks you would put for the diet that you guys already have. So this is the Mediterranean diet tool. So what does this go through? The more ticks, the better. We will talk about one of the most important changes in advice that we know in terms of the pouch. We know that our patients should have a healthy, balanced diet. But more recently, a group of researchers have tested the Mediterranean diet, a sustainable version of it as well. And we know that the Mediterranean diet, in terms of the pouch, it decreases the fecal calprotectin, which means it lowers inflammation. And we know that because it's rich in a lot of fruits and vegetables and different kind of plant sources, it decreases the inflammation, but it also helps our bowel, of our bowel's bacteria, the good bacteria in there, to thrive. And we know that with the recent years, the probiotics and the microbiota, which is the environment of our bowel, has a very, very big role. It plays a role not only in our bowel, but it also plays a role in all other immunity in our skin, in our brain, in everything. So it's now the proposed advice for our patients, and it doesn't change much from the plate, the healthy food plate we always know, but it's a little bit more specific. So going back, we know that our diet should be based in plants as much as possible. We know that we should have enough water, 1.5 to 2 liters at least. We know that our main meal should consist of the very bottom of the pyramid, which is mainly grains and whole grain, if possible, if we can handle them in our tummies, pasta, rice, buckwheat, couscous, quinoa as the base, vegetables that we should have for at least 2 portions per day. It should be varied, so colors in fruit and vegetable tell you different antioxidants. For example, carrots have the orange color because of their beta carotene, their vitamin E, their vitamin A. We know that the more varied, the more colorful, the different kind of colors that we see in our plate is not only more visual pleasant to us, for us to eat, but we are also making sure that we get different types of minerals, vitamins, and trace elements. We know that we should be using olive oil, especially extra virgin olive oil, because of its ability to stand higher temperatures, and also its ability to have more antioxidants that are helping our bowel and our body get rid of the radicals, the bad products of all the biochemistry and all the environment. And we also know that we should have nuts and seeds if we are able to tolerate them, but if not, there are different changes. For example, if I can't have nuts because they irritate my pouch, I can have a smooth tablespoon of nut butter. It gives you exactly the same things in terms of nutrients, but it doesn't give you the irritability in pouch. And we should be aiming for having dairy and avoiding to have red meat, have fish, especially wild fish for sustainability, chicken, eggs. We should be avoiding sugar in general in terms of sugary processed foods, but also try to avoid anything that basically lasts on a long time on the shelf. So if you go to the supermarket and something will expire in 2 years and it's in a pack, it's most likely that it's really processed. It has lots of additives, lots of emulsifiers, and it's not really great for our bowel. So I wanted to mention a little bit about sustainability because it's really important for our environment. I'll put it in there and I will send the presentation, but we'll move for time. So I put here the swaps that we could do if we are not taking many of our of the Mediterranean diet. For example, if you're using butter, use olive oil. If you're not having enough vegetables, try and see if you can slowly start bringing in one new vegetable from the supermarket, seasonal, every week. Try it in small amounts and try to slowly get your shopping list to have more and more. We are all kind of guilty of getting the same things and cooking the same things all over again. So try and slowly make it a habit. I'll get a new fruit or veg today, and try and introduce it over the week. Try and avoid anything that has a lot of saturated fats. For example, if you are going to have red meat, try not to have it more than twice a week, but try and choose leaner meats of fat. And of course, try and cook as much as possible fresh. Choose local, seasonal food from your producers around you to try and have the least impact on the environment. So triggers, alcohol. Alcohol for some patients can be irritating to the bowel. We know that there are different recommendations in different countries. In the UK, for thin units of alcohol for both men and women. Before, men were allowed to have a little bit more. Now both men and women are the same. The pregnant ladies no longer can have a little bit of alcohol. We advise no alcohol at all. And I think the most important thing, especially with the lockdown easing up, we are all very excited. We are very scared, but very excited at the same time. Try not to binge and have consecutive days of alcohol. Try and spread it out during the week. Have one day that you would drink a little bit, a couple of days without drinking in the interim, and try and know how much you're drinking in terms of units. I've put here the link for the calculator of how many drinks you're having and how many units. It would be very easy if it was one drink, 1 unit, but the different strengths, the different sizes of alcohol can make it a little bit confusing. So in terms of the bowel triggers, though, we know that the alcohol changes how our body absorbs fluid. So it can either make us constipated for some patients, dehydrate us, or it can make us move our pouch much more. We know that caffeine, which is a great favorite of mine, it's a stimulant. It makes our bowel move faster, and we are advising to limit up to a cup a day. Consistently in literature, you will see that although there is a variety of what triggers each patient has with a pouch, every single time you would see that caffeine plays a big role. So it's one of the big triggers in pouch. The other one is chili or capsaicin, the spicy foods, which is again a stimulant in moving our bowels very quickly. So I'm going to mention a little bit about fermentable carbohydrates, or FODMAPs, that you must have heard in the media. So what are fermentable carbohydrates? First of all, carbohydrates, either grains, vegetables, fruits, and some other kind of food groups like honey, the kind of arbitrary ones. What are they? They are carbohydrates that our body has a difficulty in digesting, breaking down completely. So to break them down and digest them and make them useful for us, our bacteria in the bowel ferment it, breaking down to use it for their own energy source. And in that kind of action, they create gas, or because these fermentable carbohydrates go through the bowel and they're really concentrated and they are not digested, they often draw in fluids from the body, and we have more diarrhea in our stool. So they are indigestible, broken by the bacteria in our bowel. In that process, they create gas, which makes us bloated or have pain because we have more sensitivity in our bowel, but also they can draw in more fluid, causing more diarrhea. If we were to advise a patient to do a low FODMAP diet strictly, they will need to be under a dietitian supervision. And I know it's very difficult to see a dietitian or have someone local to you. And a lot of patients turn to Google, which often kind of gives not only conflicting advice, but the most important thing is that it doesn't guide you to reintroduction. That you might avoid a few things, but what worries me is that how long will you be doing it for? You need to have a specific time frame, up to 6 to 8 weeks. You need to be able to swap anything that you would remove from your diet and put back something equivalent so that you don't lose weight. And we recently saw that the more restricted we are, the more we avoid these fermentable carbohydrates, we are actually affecting our environment in the bowel, and our bacteria are starving. We might lose the diversity of our bowel, which is really, really important in health. So it's really important to try and do as less restricted as possible. What I do, and this is what I put on the table, I start with general swaps. I don't ask my patients to do it fully, very strictly. We start by swapping very basic things. If we do a diet history and I can see that they have onion and garlic with every single meal and in big amounts, or they might be having large amounts of a kind of vegetables that I know is fermentable, I would start by swapping those. Or I've put here a general low FODMAP diet that is not as strict, that I would advise you to swap, but try and follow it for about 4 to 6 weeks, and making sure that you then start bringing in every group that you've excluded to see the effect of it. So pouch evidence with low FODMAP diets. We know that they work, especially in patients that don't have pouchitis, inflammation, and it's really important to make sure there's nothing else going on and it's just a functional thing. And we know that it works in decreasing the pain, the bloating, the wind, the diarrhea, but it also helps to reduce how many times we go to the loo. It makes our stool more bulky, and it also increases the consistency. This is a summary of all the different problems in pouch that I encounter, and I've put under it every single food that I would relate to different symptoms. For example, perianal irritation, so itchy bum. I would do spicy, avoiding spicy and hot foods, nuts and seeds that when we eat, we don't break down completely, and it leaves little bits that might irritate our pouch as it comes out. High concentration of citrus foods, for example, tomatoes or kind of lemon, caffeine, dairy products, beer or wine. And then we have on the other end, bad odor, eggs, fish, asparagus, garlic, onion, and foods that are hard to digest. Celery, which we know it has all the stringy bits, even if we cook it, you can see it. Corn, dried fruit, mushrooms, nuts, peas, pickles, raw vegetables, seeds again. So what I will try and do is try and find out what is the main symptom that we are targeting. And I would welcome you to go and see whatever your symptoms are, what the food might be causing it, and try and avoid it for a couple of weeks and see if it makes any difference. Please don't keep avoiding food if it doesn't make any difference. So top tips. This is all from literature, going through all the studies that happened in over the years from the 80s until now. We know that in relation to diets, if we have, the more meals we have in a day, the more pouch, the more movement in our bowel. So trying not to have more than 3 meals a day. That doesn't include snacks. I mean meals that have a substantial portion that stretch your stomach and give an instruction to your bowel to empty so that more food is coming. So try and avoid having more than 3. The other big one, especially for nocturnal, so night pouch openings, getting up at night, is not to have a meal at least, try to have a meal at least 3 hours before you sleep. So try and experiment with timings, and meal size is a very important thing. Remember that you are unique, that you need to kind of test it, trial and error, and see what affects you. I would avoid unnecessary restrictions because food is amazing, and the more we restrict, the more hard it is to have a varied diet. Try and take one new food at a time, as we mentioned. But for me, it's also mindful eating. It's slowly chew your food well, avoid interruptions, enjoy your food. I tend to also give my patients advice to get a radar key, which I'm sure the pouch, the Red Lion group advises as well. There is a great map that you can see wherever you can find the toilets that are open. And there is a tip from me over lockdown. And if it happens again, there is a website called lockdownloo.com that they keep updating the toilets that are the locked toilets for Radar Key that are available even in lockdown. So making sure where toilets are around me so that I'm able to go out and enjoy. So how do I test about food intolerances? I would first start doing by recording, doing a food and symptom diary. I would do it for about a week minimum. I've put an example of what I give to my patients. So it's really important to have everything that you eat and drink, what's in the recipe, how much, making sure that you add if there are extra sauces, if it's fried, that there's a takeaway, what gut symptoms you have and what time, when do they start, when do they end, and kind of rating that. Making sure that you add your bowel movement habits, how many times a day you're opening your bowels, the consistency, the color, is there blood, is there mucus, if there are pieces of undigested food. Exercise, which is really important for both our physical health, but also our mental health. Making sure that we rest well. We know that sleep is really important, especially in our gut function. And any other stresses and emotions. Have you had a fight with someone? Are you upset about anything? Is it really a hard period? Is it really busy at work? Is there anything that makes the gut and the brain, which are really well connected with the gut-brain axis, is it affecting you? Is it stressing things out and impacting on your power? So making a note of that food and food diary for about a week, then looking at it and see, is there a pattern? Is there something that I can see? Is it on the days that I'm over the weekend and I don't have any work and I eat exactly the same, I'm fine? Or is it a particular thing that, for example, I start with coffee in the morning and I run to the loo? So try to pick up patterns. If you pick up patterns and it's not too many, trying to restrict that food. If there are a lot of them, it's really hard, and I think it's better if we get advice from either the medical team or the dietitians, because it's a complex thing. If there's all over the place, for example, I would think, is there inflammation? Is it pouchitis? Is there something else, for example, small bacterial overgrowth? So your team, if it's really all over the place, will kind of try and see if there is a reason behind it. And I would start by planning the elimination diet. When am I going to do it? Is my family aware that I'm going to do it, or are they going to offer me the most amazing foods that I enjoy as soon as I start doing it? Am I able to cook and prep for it? Am I able to check the ingredients? Do I know what I'm going to be replacing it with? So meal planning is really, really important, and making sure that we replace the food. I wouldn't do it more than 4 weeks. What usually happens, especially with dairy, with lactose, the effects are immediate. So even in a week, our patients find out if there is a difference in avoiding lactose or not. So for some things, a week is enough. For some things, it takes a little bit longer, especially if there are other things that are happening, for example, stress around, but not more than 4 weeks. And then to make sure that it's the right thing I'm removing, and it's not just something that doesn't make any difference, the most important thing is to bring it back. If you don't have it ever again, you would never know if it was that one thing. So it's really important to confirm that's that, we bring it back. If we avoid it without kind of bringing it back and confirming it, quality of life in literature is a little bit worse. We make our bowel bacteria a little bit the more we restrict, the more likely that diversity will be affected. But we are also getting more sensitive in that exact food if we live for a long period without it, and then we try it. So what I would usually see, patients avoiding it for 10 years, and then as soon as they have even a small amount, they might get the effects because they haven't had it for such a long time, as well as, of course, restricting of malnutrition. So start by bringing back a very tiny bit. If you have no symptoms, double it up. If you have no symptoms, keep doubling it up until you're happy with the amount. Or if you do have symptoms, as soon as you try it, stop, wait for your symptoms to settle, half the portion, and retry it again. Or when you are having symptoms after you had already a few doubling up portions, the previous portion is what you can tolerate. So do you want me to do 2 slides on probiotics and just as a summary, or shall we get to questions?
No, I'd really like to see 2 slides on probiotics, and I think a lot of the audience would.
So three groups that everybody's asking me about: prebiotics, probiotics, and fermentable foods. So prebiotics. Prebiotics is the food of our bacteria, of our good bacteria, hopefully, that they use to survive and use for energy. So they are the energy sources. They are often, but not always, a type of fiber, and the names include inulin, fructooligosaccharides, galactooligosaccharides. If you take a yogurt, usually yogurts and cereal from your house or fridge, you'll see that if you turn the back, the ingredients, usually it has inulin, which is a type of prebiotic. And if we're using a natural probiotic containing yogurt, this prebiotic is there, and it's almost a balance of pre and pro. Not everything is a prebiotic, of course. It needs to have evidence that it's providing a healthy effect, and we know that there is not much evidence at the moment in pouch. However, there has been a couple of studies. The most important one, although it's very small and not of a great quality, they've used inulin, and they found that it decreased the inflammation in pouchitis. They use the PDAID, which is the pouchitis disease active index. So we know that there is future in kind of maybe combining different prebiotics and probiotics. So fermented foods, you've all heard about them. The kimchi, they've existed for thousands of years. The kimchi, we have different cultures have different ones. Kefir, you might have heard. So we know that there is very limited evidence in humans, good evidence as well. And we know that what they do, or what they could be doing, is they could be offering, because of their live bacteria, they could be offering a benefit in our bodies by making our bodies absorbing more B12 or folate or riboflavin, which is a types of B vitamins. And it also produces, they could also produce beneficial compounds such as these organic acids, the GABA, which have shown to make us a little bit more relaxed, support our blood sugar control, help with decreasing our blood pressure. But they could also be removing unhelpful toxins from foods. For example, phytic acid, so phytate, I think I'm pronouncing it right, is present in whole grains and a variety of them in general. And we know that the fermented foods remove these phytates from our foods, and the phytates stop our body from absorbing zinc. So they could be offering a different kind of benefits to us. But we do know that there is very little evidence around fermented foods. Probiotics, good gut bacteria, they are they have to be alive in our to reach our bowel or alive. They have to be present in large amounts. They need to have evidence in providing a health benefit for our condition. So not everything is considered a probiotic. There is a lot of them out there. How do we choose the right one? So the most important thing is, what am I choosing it for? Am I choosing it for bloating? Am I choosing it for pain? Am I choosing it for overall health? Usually, in overall health, if there is nothing to treat or nothing that we worry about, we don't. So we to finish with this is our environment in our bowel has many different bacteria, many different types of bacteria. Each of them do different things. For example, we know that it affects the immunity, it helps break down food, it maintains our gut integrity, which means it maintains our gut being healthy and really strong. We know that it helps with immunity overall, and they break down drugs. So we know that there's an important variety of elements that they tend to do. And we know that in IBD, by default, there is differences in the microbiome between healthy patients that don't have IBD and healthy patients that have IBD. It's really different. So it's really difficult to take evidence that is used from probiotics in other conditions or in general in a healthy gut and put it into IBD and hope that it will work. And there's done a lot of them that they haven't been successful, but they've also so there's been research in pouch, and we know that the results from it have been a little bit mixed in terms of probiotics and pouch. We know that there is limited evidence. They couldn't find a relationship between specific changes and inflammation, but there is a big interest. And the most important bit is that during the ECHO, during last year, the ECHO have published guidelines for pouches that they mentioned that the probiotics in all the trials that they've studied may help to prevent acute flares of pouchitis, but they can also help in maintaining remission of chronic pouchitis. They are not to treat moderate pouchitis, so they're either used to prevent a pouchitis or to maintain the remission. And these are the studies that they've used. I've created a little table with all the probiotics and pouch. So I've put the probiotic strain, what dose it should be taken into, and it's all with evidence in pouch. Level 2 evidence means that it's not the best quality. There is some evidence, but it's not of a great quality. And level 1 is the best quality. So you will know that the 8th strain that is mentioned there was previously named as VSL3. In the UK now named as Vivomix. And what they found is that it can be used to prevent pouchitis recurrence, but it can also be used to maintain the chronic pouchitis patients, not to become severe, but not to treat moderate pouchitis. I've put the cost because it's really important for everyone to know that usually the cost is around £100 a month for the Vivomix. It's quite a lot. I know that before they used to be prescribed, and I know that our GPs no longer prescribe them. But I am hoping that as the evidence comes in for pouches and probiotics, that things might change. So I'm going to stop there because I think I can go on and on and on about pouch and diet and everything. I'll leave this on the background, which is a summary of what I would treat different patients in with different conditions, and I'm more than happy to take questions.
Well, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And
I have to apologize because I think I was so tired after cleaning. I couldn't get my thought straight. So apologize, everyone.
oh, don't apologize. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. There's a huge amount of information there, really absolutely fabulous. And I've got a number of questions for you, Gabriella. So I know it's late. I know you're still at the hospital.
Go for it, because it was much.
We'll try and restrict this because you've got to get home. But you know, inevitably, it's a topic that's close to many people's hearts. So I'm just going to blurt these out as they come, really, because they're quite varied. So a number of questions tabled during your talk. The first one is a kind of obtuse one. How do you diagnose bile salt diarrhea? And that comes from Gaza McGaza-Bronzier.
Hello, thank you for the question. So, bile salt diarrhea is diagnosed by a test called the CCAT scan. So what they give is basically radioactive, kind of a very fluorescent kind of medication that can track in 7 days. So they test it in day 1 and they test it in day 7, and they can see how well it's being digested or not digested. So it's called CCAT scan. It can be done. We do it in the hospital, but what I tend to do without needing to wait for the scan, I tend to liaise with the doctors and ask them if it will be, if I'm really sure that that's happening, or I have kind of strong suspicions that is happening, we might get the GP or the doctors here to prescribe a week's worth of these bile salt questions, these binders. And if it works, for me, and for the doctors, it's a positive it's what we call empirical treatment. We are suspecting it. We are not going to wait for the test for it. We can do it later on, but I do a week's worth of bile question as an empirical treatment usually.
I hope that answers your question, Gary.
Yes, indeed. So it sounds like everybody should try it. I mean, the actual prescription. If it can't do any harm.
Everybody, guys, only that few people that need. So I'll give you a tip. Bile salt diarrhea. I would ask questions like, are your stools? I will try and see if there is fat malabsorption, or if there is this kind of frothy yellow foamy stools that tend to differ from your usual pouch. So I would ask questions on the pouch output as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Colin asked a question about a vitamin K deficiency. Sharp-eyed Colin noticed that vitamin K seemed to be absorbed in the colon, and asked if there was a risk that people with pouches might be deficient.
So in 2020, they did a study for vitamin K deficiency, and they found that in the patient group that they saw, they identified vitamin K. However, it's because vitamin K is also related with clotting. It's not as simple as if I'm low in it. Kind of, it's just related because of the malabsorption. There is a whole kind of mechanism around clotting, and usually the patients that I see very rarely have that deficiency, but it's been picked up on. You're right, they've done it last year. I think more of those studies will come.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question, Colin. So Darren asked the question, hold on, what does bicarbonate of soda do in the dehydration megamix from St. Mark's?
So the bicarbonate is used in that, like I mentioned, with the revolving doors of getting the sodium and the glucose back in. It's needed for the concentration. So there are, think of it literally as kind of a mattress that many kind of doors exist in the bowel, and they all need certain keys to be there for all of them to work and get the fluid from inside the bowel inside. And bicarbonate is one of those things. So it's literally for getting the fluid from inside into the body using kind of those proteins that need the bicarbonate. It's really essential. The only reason that I would ask a patient ever to weigh anything would be for the emix, not for foods, not for anything like that, literally for the emix.
Terrific, thank you. Thanks very much. Carol is a relatively new pouchie. So you mentioned about it takes a whole year for the gut to settle down, the remaining gut to settle down. And Carol's probably at the early stage of that. So Carol's question was related to psyllium husk and asking the question, are there foods that have the same effect as psyllium husk?
So not exactly the same effect, because it's one of the very kind of unique fiber types that kind of trap the water and bulk up, but similar effects. For example, oats would have a similar type of effect. So if you think of porridge, you have the oats, you add the water, and they swell and they absorb all the water. So very similarly, oats will help in bulk up your stool. But there are other foods like bananas and marshmallows and kind of jelly babies and rice and pasta. So stodgier foods would do that. Apple puree tends to do that because of the pectin. But the closest one to the psyllium husk that I would think about would be oats.
Oats. Right. Thank you very much. And you mentioned about output happening between half an hour and 4 hours after eating. Is that what you've eaten, or is that maybe the meal before? Because
have I, sorry, I'm not sure if I did. I think what I mentioned is that usually every time that we eat a substantial food, a meal rather than a snack, because of the kind of the amount of food that we eat, our stomach stretches and it sends signal to our bowel to move, get rid of whatever you've got in there, in a sense, empty, so that more food is coming. It happens usually in pouch patients immediately. Immediately, like really soon after a meal, but it doesn't relate to what you've eaten now, as you said. It relates to what it had there before.
Clarification, that's very good, thank you.
Absolutely.
Although some people, I'm myself included, have noticed that some stuff goes right through really quickly. Tomato soup, you know.
With that, I would think about fluid. So the thing that I would say that it goes straight, runs through me, is anything that like fluid, that if I have either too much volume in one go, or if I would advise all my pouch patients to not have drinks with their meals. So because you are making the volume that goes into your stomach much bigger. I would say separate the two. Of course, if you're choking, have a sip. In general, as a volume, I would try and avoid too much volume. So if you are having soup, a lot of it that might happen, or if you're drinking, you're very thirsty and you're drinking loads, that might get straight through. So paradoxically, for patients that have a high output pouch, the more we paradoxically into other people, the more we drink all these fluids, the more our pouch output, the more dehydrated we get, and we go through this cycle almost of thirsty, drink loads, more output, dehydrate, and have more drink again. So that's when we come in and say, we have to look at getting the electrolyte mixture, so giving you something that has the right concentration to absorb, but also at the same time restrict all of the rest of the things that you're drinking so that things don't run through you. So I would usually restrict 1 liter of normal fluid, any fluid, and then add an electrolyte mixture liter. Not everybody needs to do that. It's only people that do have the high pouch.
Okay, that's brilliant. And on the topic of the electrolyte mix, and I believe she's on the call tonight, one of the committee members of the Redline Group is a very wise lady indeed, pouchy, called Teresa. We call her Mother Teresa because she's very wise and very caring. I can't see you on the gallery, Teresa, but are you smiling? Mother Teresa, one of the couple of things that she's come up with is her own version of the hydration mix, which we have on the website, on the Redline Group website, but also very importantly, and I really appreciated the fact that you put the prices of probiotics on that slide, because I think many people would like to be taking more Vivo Mix and are put off by the price. And of course, we've even considered on the committee, Redline Group committee, trying to lobby for free or Vivo Mix to be available on prescription, which is a really long shot. But Mother Teresa has also come up with a version of probiotic natural yogurt recipe, which she swears by, and that's also published on, I think, on the Redline Group website. So for those members who paid their £10, right there is millions of pounds savings a year for probiotics, according to Mother Teresa's recipe. Let me ask you a really important question for me, because what I'm always amazed at, Gabriella, is the variety of sensitivities to different foods that you see amongst pouch people. Now, is this real? Is it imagined? Is it genuinely, is there a vast variation in people's sensitivity? I mean, we've all had pretty much the same operations.
Yeah.
We've all got pretty much the same amount of tissue missing. There might be some sort of simple variations in the pouch structures, but is it real that there's so much variation? Is that your experience?
So the evidence says that even in control studies, that there is huge variation.
Right.
2 common triggers, that food triggers that keep coming up is for food, lactose, dairy. That there's a research that mentions that some people become lactose intolerant after the surgery. Now, is it because of the probiotics of the gut bacteria? Because in kind of bowels that are complete with the large bowel as well, the bacteria are mostly in the large bowel. So I don't know if there is something to do with also removing the large bowel, especially initially. But caffeine and lactose, dairy, are coming up very, very quick, very, very often, and in different trials that have all sorts of foods. My opinion is that there are 3 things that come to my mind. First of all, that restrictions that are happened before and are never re-challenged, they are never trialed again. It's almost like I remove that and I keep removing without checking that actually I've had my surgery. There is no inflammation in, I don't have a large bowel. Shall I check something that I removed at the time I had the inflammation? So I think some of the restrictions are because of older intolerances that have never been re-challenged. And some of them are definitely because of fear of
Mm.
trying.
Mm.
It's very real.
Yeah.
The fear about food, and because of the trauma that food causes often.
Yeah, especially in pouches. And there's also, I think, a real risk that people read on Facebook websites, etc., social media.
I was going to mention that I am really happy that people want to learn and want to educate themselves. But I think that Google is, it's Dr. Google, we call it here. It can be risky because something that worked for somebody else might not be suitable for you. But the most important thing is that you don't know the patient that tried that food and got benefit from not having it. Did they have another underlying thing at the background? For example, did they have small bacterial overgrowth in any way by removing things that feed this bacteria, like wheat or something? I think it's almost, I know why people do it, and I think possibly if I was a patient, I would do it as well. But at the same time, it's almost taking a step back, doing the basics, how I eat, my behavior towards food. Am I doing other things that are stressing me out at the same time? Am I sleeping well? Am I exercising? Am I doing everything that I can? And then top, one single change at a time. That's food diary, one single change, eliminate, see how you are, and bring it back to confirm that it's really something.
I can understand some foods causing things like gas, bloating, diarrhea, increasing bowel motions, decreasing or increasing the fluidity of the consistency of the pouch output. What about things like blockages? Because that's a pretty serious side effect.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people will swear that certain foods cause either spasms or blockage, whatever you want to call it. Let's assume it's the spasm type blockage where your gut just is overloaded or whatever. Is that food related?
It can be. So I would first see if there is any narrowing in the bowel. Is there a physical, kind of anatomical, mechanical changes? I tend to mention to most of my patients like a plumbing situation. If your pipe is blocked at some point, if you keep putting things on top of it, it will at some point kind of feel that there's too much in, or you might end up vomiting. If there's a blockage, if there's an, so that's the first thing. The other bit is that some foods, like you said, especially fermentable foods that in the process of digestion they create gas, they can sometimes feel like it's cramping in the body. They can sometimes feel like a spasm. So I would think more towards the fermentable foods that I mentioned for the spasm. But if there is a true kind of blockage feeling, I would avoid eating more on top of it if my bowels haven't moved and I'm feeling sick or I'm throwing up. And I would keep to more of a liquid diet for until the kind of obstruction is resolved. But also I would say try not to have big meals plus fluid that we mentioned before, drinking whilst you eat, and kind of making your stomach overfloated with both the liquid and the food. So kind of little and often, spread things out, chew food well, avoid having them too close to your nighttime because you're gonna get up at night, and try and have as much as possible fresh food.
Okay, that's perfect. That's really good. Thank you. I'm very conscious of time. I'm going to ask one last question, and then let you go. I saw on the Mediterranean diet what I thought said more than 3 glasses of red wine per day. And a part of me was overjoyed. And then on a subsequent slide, it was corrected, I was corrected. It was more than 3 glasses of red wine a week.
Yeah, it's a week.
Fills me with sadness per week. Yeah.
Let me check. Did we put here?
Yeah, no, I misread it. I'm sure I misread it.
So you know what? Wine is if you're. I'm not gonna tell someone start drinking if they're generally, but if they are, and if you enjoy in moderation, like everything that we do in general should be in moderation, I would go for kind of alcohol that actually has a benefit for my body, as well as the taste. For example, the fermentable foods that we mentioned, and I think I forgot to say that at the time. Wine is a fermentable food, like coffee, like chocolate.
That sounds like an endorsement to me, Raquel.
Please don't
yeah,
there is
yeah.
So the wine has these amazing polyphenols which create all those deep, rich kind of taste in wine. It's good for you. We know that it's good for your heart, but we know that if you overdo it, it's not going to be good for your heart. It's going to start creating problems for your liver. So it's almost using an alcohol type that you would like. Red is better than wine because of these antioxidants, the polyphenols. But again, I have patients that tell me as soon as I have alcohol, especially if it's a fizzy alcohol like a beer, I need to go to the loo, and I'm in the pub usually, and it's really, really bad. So that is probably not the alcohol so much, but the fizziness of the drink. And if you notice that the sparkle, the fizziness in a drink makes our bowel move faster. That's why people get drunk with champagne much quicker, because bubbles move everything quicker and you absorb the alcohol kind of quicker. But I would stick to clear spirits or red wine, and I would avoid the fizziness of it, which includes like sparkling water or like other soft drinks that are not great for us. When I think of fermentability and FODMAPs, I usually give my patients the example of creating beer using grain, adding the yeast, the bacteria that takes the carbohydrates and creates gas, which is the fizz, but makes the beer. So I think that helps in kind of visualizing what actually happens in FODMAP.
Okay, on that note, what is the best cocktail that Pouchies should be drinking?
I think I wouldn't go for cocktail. I would go for a clean kind of a clear spirit or a wine rather than a cocktail. And I'll tell you why, because you have so many things added in there and you have a lot of sugar at the same time, but and usually the volume is much more. So I think of what you enjoy. If you enjoy it, have it, enjoy it. That's the most important thing. Plan for things that might not agree with you to have them and have a good quality of life and not avoid too many things in your life if you can. But the most important thing is you liking them, but I wouldn't choose that generally.
What a great way to end.
With a
Find out what you like. How about a real mojito? That's Mother Teresa again. How's about a real mojito? That's what I was thinking. Yeah, it's nice and clean. It's got a few vegetables in. I mean, you know.
Can I offer, if you guys want to, and there are questions that probably or come up to you, if you want to send them to your kind of the committee, and if you send me an email with all of them, I would be more than happy to reply.
Oh, that's very kind.
By the end of the week, by the end of the week.
That's very kind.
Please do.
That's very kind. Can I ask, are we going to have access to these slides? Because we were really
Yeah,
publish
absolutely.
them
I
on the
think
website.
having access is a bit better because
Mm.
probably I didn't get through them the way that I would have liked. So
Oh, that was
I'm really
excellent.
happy to send them to.
No, that was an excellent presentation. And on behalf of everybody who's dialed in tonight, but can I thank you most sincerely for another tremendous talk on such an important topic for Pouchies. And thank you so much for giving your time. It's greatly appreciated, Gabriella.
Pleasure. Have a lovely night, everybody.
Yeah, and safe journey home. Just to finish off, so Gabriella is going to kindly provide the slides, which is great. Look out for them on the website. And we've got a packed agenda coming up for subsequent talks in September. So please check with the website and check on the Facebook group. We're going to be advertising some very important, very exciting presentations coming up in September. Hopefully, we've got to line up the dates yet. But last but not least, thanks, Gary. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you to you all for dialing in. And again, most importantly, thank you to Gabriella.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All the best, everyone.
Bye.
Keep safe. Bye-bye.
Bye. 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 Bye.